There comes an age when you start to notice something uncomfortable. It's not your body, though that too. It's the feeling that, within your own family, you no longer quite fit. You speak, and you're not heard the same way. You share an opinion, and it's treated like something outdated. Sometimes there isn't even conflict, just distance. And then a word appears that hurts more than it seems. Misunderstood. Maybe you felt that way. Like the black sheep. Not because you did something terrible, but because you stopped playing the role they expected of you. I've been there. I've felt that mix of pride and sadness when you realize you're no longer the reference point, the center, or the refuge, and the quiet questions begin. When did I stop mattering? Do I need to adapt so I don't lose them? Or stay silent so I don't bother anyone? No one prepares you for this place. There's no manual for living on the margins of your own family story. My name is Gabriel, and this is the Stoic Garden. Next, I'm going to share several insights drawn from the philosophy of the ancient Stoics and from my own life that helped me turn that uncomfortable place into solid ground. Not to be liked more, not to be accepted, but to live this stage with dignity without asking for permission. Stay. This isn't about reconciling with anyone yet. It's about something deeper. 1. Separating dignity from family approval. There comes a moment, almost always after 60, when something becomes impossible to deny. You're still the same person, but you're no longer seen the same way. Not because you failed, but because the place you held changed without asking you. Children make decisions without consulting you. Siblings stop calling. Opinions hang in the air without a response. And that's when a dangerous temptation appears, starting to measure your worth by other people's reactions. If they listen, you matter. If they ignore you, you doubt yourself. I stayed stuck there for a while, thinking about what to say so I wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable, how to explain my decisions better, what gesture might bring back some approval. I say this with a quiet sense of shame, because you think that at a certain age, you don't fall into those traps anymore. But you do. Because the need to belong doesn't disappear with time, it just becomes quieter. Have you ever left a family gathering feeling smaller than when you arrived? Separating dignity from approval isn't a pretty concept. It's an uncomfortable inner operation. It means accepting that you may not be recognized, thanked, or understood, and still remain upright inside. Epictetus said that if you depend on what others think, you hand them control over your peace. I didn't learn that from a book first. I lived it on an ordinary afternoon, sitting alone at home, realizing I was tired of justifying my existence. Picture a simple scene. Sunday at midday, the family gathered. You talk about something that matters to you and someone changes the subject. There's no argument, no shouting, just that gesture. That's where much more is decided than it seems. Either you shrink a little more inside, or you begin a quiet kind of work, remembering who you are without witnesses. This isn't about confronting anyone. It's about not abandoning yourself. The tool here is simple, but it demands consistency. Every time you feel the urge to seek family validation, stop for a second and ask yourself whether what you're about to say or do is something you would still do even if no one approved. Write it down if you need to. Keep a notebook. List decisions you made on your own, in alignment with yourself, and return to them when you doubt. Dignity is trained like a muscle, in solitude. Don't confuse this with hardness or coldness. It's not about closing your heart, it's about closing the door to emotional begging. Because when your dignity depends on approval, you become fragile. And family, without meaning to, senses that fragility. The phrase that held me together was this, and I never forgot it. I don't need to be recognized in order to respect myself, but saying it isn't enough. You have to live it. And here's where the tension remains. Because when you stop seeking approval, something shifts. Not always on the outside, but certainly on the inside. And that inner change begins to affect the rest of your relationships, even the way you use your energy. That's what we'll talk about next. 2. Withdrawing energy from a role you're no longer given. Some roles don't end all at once, they wear down. They empty out without warning. One day you realize you're still acting as the advisor, the support, the one who's always available, but on the other side there's no longer any reception. No one asks for your opinion. No one expects your presence. And yet you keep showing up, offering, insisting, occupying a place that no longer belongs to you. Not because you lack value, but because the stage has changed. It took me a long time to see this. For years I kept behaving as if I was still needed. I gave advice no one asked for. I stepped in to solve problems that were no longer mine. I answered calls that never came. And the hardest part wasn't the lack of response, but the inner wear and tear. That feeling of giving something valuable to a space that no longer receives it. How much energy are you investing today in a role no one is offering you? Withdrawing energy isn't about punishing anyone. It's not about making a scene or announcing anything. It's a sober act. Quiet, like when you stop watering a plant that's no longer in your garden. Stoicism helped me understand this in a practical way. Marcus Aurelius insisted on not spending your soul on what doesn't depend on you. I translate it like this: don't keep pushing a door that no longer opens. Think of an everyday scene. The phone on the table. You look at it more than you should. You wait for a message that doesn't come. And when it does arrive, it's usually for something functional, quick, without depth. That's where many older people make a very understandable mistake. They become excessively available. They reply immediately. They adapt to any schedule. They cancel their own plans. They think this will help them regain their place, but all it does is empty them out. The tool here is concrete. Set an internal limit before you ever need to set an external one. Decide how much energy you're willing to give without reciprocity. Don't explain it to anyone. Just change your behavior. Don't always be there. Don't solve everything. Don't get ahead of things. Use that time for something that's yours, a physical habit, slow reading, a walk with no goal. At first it hurts because the silence grows louder, but then something new appears. A clear warning because no one says it. If you keep insisting on a role you're no longer given, over time you don't just become invisible, you become resentful, and resentment does break relationships. Withdrawing energy in time is a way to preserve dignity and, paradoxically, to protect the respect that may still grow. The phrase that stays with me here doesn't close anything, but it brings order to a lot. Where there is no place for you, don't put your life. And when you do that, when you pull back that poorly invested energy, an unexpected space appears. A new territory many people fear, but one that can become a source of strength. That's what we'll talk about next. 3. Turning solitude into your own territory. Solitude, when it arrives in old age, rarely shows up as a dramatic event. There's no door slamming shut. It's more like a house slowly growing quiet. Fewer calls, fewer visits, fewer interruptions. At first, it feels like a punishment, almost like proof that something went wrong. I thought that too. I asked myself what I had done to deserve being left alone with my days. But over time, I understood that I was looking at solitude from the wrong angle. Thinking out loud helped me see it. I realized that much of my life had been organized around others, other people's schedules, other people's needs, other people's noise. When all of that fell away, what remained was a bare space that feels frightening because it comes with no instructions. What do you do when no one is waiting for you? No one demands anything from you? No one is watching? Many people fill that emptiness with television, with complaints, with memories that repeat themselves. But there's a more demanding, more honest possibility there. I remember one specific morning. I woke up early as usual and had no one to notify, no one to coordinate anything with. The day was completely mine. I felt a brief vertigo, almost physical, and then something like relief. For the first time in years, time wasn't asking me to explain myself. Solitude began to reveal itself not as abandonment, but as territory, a space without interference where I could rebuild myself without witnesses. Seneca spoke of retreating inward when the world becomes confusing, not as an escape, but as a way of restoring order. I understood that idea by walking alone, without headphones, letting thoughts surface without distraction. Solitude, when used well, doesn't make you smaller. It restores your sense of proportion. It allows you to hear yourself without the constant echo of family, expectations, and old roles that no longer exist. The tool here is intentional. Design your solitude. Don't just endure it. Establish simple rituals that give it shape. A fixed time to move your body. A moment in the day to read something that isn't noise. A meal prepared with care, even if it's only for you. When you turn solitude into structure, it stops being a punishment and becomes a foundation. Don't wait for someone else to fill that space. Make it livable yourself. There's a warning I can't avoid. If you use solitude only to brood over grievances or to wait for someone to return, it turns into confinement. But if you use it to strengthen your center, it becomes an advantage. This is where, for the first time, the privilege of the black sheep appears clearly. No one directs you, no one interrupts you, no one shapes you. That demands responsibility because there's no one left to blame. And that responsibility leads to an uncomfortable question you shouldn't avoid. When no one is watching, do you still live according to your values, or do you dissolve? Because in that silence, another, deeper work begins, one that doesn't ask for permission and doesn't seek approval. That's the next step. 4. Ordering your values without asking for permission. There's a stage in life when you discover something uncomfortable. Many of the values you held for years no longer receive applause. What was once praised now seems outdated. Sobriety is mistaken for rigidity, silence for lack of interest, consistency for stubbornness. And then the temptation appears to update yourself, to soften principles, to adapt so you don't get left out. I felt it too, that inner voice asking whether it wouldn't be better to loosen up a bit just to fit in. Thinking it through slowly, I understood that values aren't negotiated without a cost. You can do it, of course, but the price is paid on the inside. Every time you act against what you believe is right to avoid friction, something falls out of order. You don't notice it at first. It's a mild discomfort, almost refined. But over the months, it turns into moral fatigue. Have you ever caught yourself doing something that doesn't represent you just to avoid being seen as difficult? I remember a family conversation where I nodded in silence at decisions I didn't agree with. I didn't argue. I didn't confront. But I also wasn't honest with myself. When I got home, I felt a strange defeat, without a fight or a word spoken. That's when I understood that ordering your values doesn't mean imposing them or defending them with speeches. It means living them without asking for authorization, without needing anyone to validate them, understand them, or share them. Here, Stoicism becomes useful again, but without solemnity. Marcus Aurelius wrote for himself not to convince others. That's the key. Your values are a private matter at their core. They don't need to be explained at the family table or defended in every conversation. They show up in your actions, in how you live, in what you accept and what you don't. Coherent silence carries more weight than any argument. The tool is clear and demands honesty. Take some time alone and write down which values truly support your life today. Not the inherited ones, not the ones that sound good, but the ones you actually practice or want to practice. Then look at your week. Notice where you betray them to avoid discomfort. Not to punish yourself, but to become aware. Ordering your values is inner work, not a public declaration. There's a common scene in old age. Someone tells you how you should live this stage, what's normal, what no longer fits. You listen, you nod, but something inside tightens. That's the signal, not of rebellion, but of misalignment. Living according to your values without asking for permission doesn't make you confrontational. It makes you predictable to yourself, which is the only predictability that matters at this point. The phrase that held me here was simple, almost dry. I don't need consensus to be coherent. It doesn't close anything. In fact, it opens a new problem. Because when you start living from your values without explaining them, an inevitable consequence appears. You'll have to learn how to set boundaries, and to do it without speeches, without justifications. That's a step many people avoid, but one that changes everything. 5. Setting boundaries without explanations. Setting boundaries in old age has a bad reputation. It's interpreted as bitterness, distance, or rejection. And that's why many people don't set them. They'd rather exhaust themselves than seem harsh. They'd rather explain themselves than cause discomfort. I was one of those people for far too long. I believed that if I said no without justifying myself, I was being unfair. Over time, I understood that I was being unfair to myself. There's a big difference between being approachable and being available for everything. Family often grows used to your silent availability. They call when they need something, they count on you without asking. They plan around the assumption that you'll adapt. And when one day you can't or don't want to, the reaction isn't always understanding. Sometimes it's surprise or irritation. That's when the fear shows up. If I set boundaries, will they love me less? I remember a simple situation. I was asked for something that completely disrupted my routine. Before, I would have said yes and then resented it in silence. That time, I said no. No long explanation, no excuses, just a sober no. The silence on the other end was uncomfortable. Mine was too, but that discomfort was clean. I didn't betray myself. And something changed, even though nothing more was said. Stoicism teaches us to distinguish what depends on us and what doesn't. Your boundary depends on you. The other person's reaction does not. When you try to justify every boundary, deep down, you're asking permission to have it. You're saying, without words, that your time and energy are still negotiable. And at this stage of life, that's a costly luxury. The tool here is concrete and practical. Rehearse your boundaries quietly with yourself, not in front of the other person. Decide in advance what you're not willing to do, what you won't respond to immediately, which spaces you need to protect. When the moment comes, respond briefly. No story, no backstory. A clear boundary doesn't need decoration. The more you explain, the more material you give others to debate it. There's a scene that repeats often. You're invited to something you don't want to attend, you accept out of obligation, and you come home tired, annoyed with yourself. That fatigue doesn't come from the event, it comes from having crossed your own boundary. Every time you do that, you lose a bit of inner authority. And without inner authority, no external respect lasts. The phrase that stays with me here is simple and doesn't pretend to close the subject. Over-explaining is an elegant way of asking for permission. When you start setting boundaries without explanations, something rearranges itself. Not always outside, but always inside. And from there, from that inner order, it becomes possible to build something more solid. A form of respect that doesn't depend on words or constant presence, but on self-sufficiency. That's the next terrain. 6. Building respect through self-sufficiency. There's an uncomfortable truth that often gets avoided within families. Respect isn't asked for and it isn't negotiated. It's built, and in old age, it's almost always built through self-sufficiency, not through brute force or confrontation, but through something quieter, through not needing, through not depending, through holding your life together without being emotionally or materially attached to anyone. It took me time to accept this because you want to believe that family affection is enough to guarantee respect. But it isn't always. When you're perceived as fragile, confused, or dependent, even without bad intentions, something changes in how you're treated. I noticed it in small details, in the tone, in decisions made on my behalf, in the constant suggestions. And I understood that it wasn't a lack of love, but a perception of weakness. Think of an everyday scene. Your body hurts, movement becomes harder, routines fall away. You start asking for help with things you used to do on your own. At first, that's normal, but if there's no conscious effort to maintain your autonomy, the role hardens. You go from being an adult to being managed. And getting out of that place is difficult. Are you taking care of your body and mind as tools of sovereignty, or are you slowly handing them over? Here, Stoicism becomes truly practical, not as philosophy, but as daily discipline. Keeping your body functional isn't vanity, it's dignity. Having clear routines isn't rigidity, it's structure. Thinking with order isn't coldness, it's defense. I started with the basics, walking every day, eating with attention, sleeping on a schedule, reading things that challenged me, not things that distracted me, nothing heroic, just consistent. The tool is simple and allows no excuses. Choose a minimal routine that makes you less dependent each month, not more. Something you can sustain without help. Don't announce it. Don't turn it into a speech. Let it speak for itself. Self-sufficiency isn't proclaimed, it's perceived. And when it's perceived, the way people treat you changes. Not because others consciously decide to, but because the body and presence speak before words. There's a warning worth hearing. If you don't build self-sufficiency now, someone else will do it for you later, and not always in the way you'd want. Respect that isn't supported by your real capacity becomes fragile. It evaporates at the first difficulty. That's why this work isn't optional. It's preventive. The phrase that stays with me here is dry but honest. No one respects someone who doesn't respect themselves in their daily actions. It doesn't close anything. In fact, it opens another problem. Because when you begin to stand on your own, a new temptation appears. To compete again. For attention, for recognition, for a visible place. And that competition at this age is a costly trap. That's what we need to talk about next. 7. Letting go of the competition for attention. There's a silent competition that many people don't recognize as such. There are no raised voices or visible winners, but it wears you down all the same. It's the competition for attention within the family. Who gets listened to, who gets invited, who matters more. And as you grow older, you usually play that game from a disadvantage that offers no rematch. I played it without realizing it, and I lost energy, calm, and clarity. Competing for attention is a subtle form of dependence. You check whether they called you, you measure interest in their response. You adjust your words so you don't get left out. You try to be useful, funny, reasonable, discreet. Also, you don't disappear from the radar. Have you ever caught yourself doing more than necessary just to be noticed a little more? I remember family gatherings where I talked too much, not out of enthusiasm, but out of fear of silence. Other times, I did the opposite. I withdrew, hoping someone would notice my absence. Neither worked, because when you compete for attention, you're always dependent on the referee. And the referee isn't you. That day, I understood something uncomfortable but freeing. If I have to compete for attention, that isn't my place. Stoicism teaches you to withdraw desire from what you don't control. You can't control other people's interest, but you can decide not to enter the contest. Stepping out of that competition isn't giving up, it's reclaiming sovereignty. When you stop trying to be seen, something loosens inside. Anxiety drops, the body calms, words become more measured, and paradoxically, your presence gains weight. The tool here is concrete and requires discipline. In your next family interaction, speak only when you have something real to say, not when you fear disappearing. And when you're not heard, don't insist. Watch what happens inside you. The urge to compete is automatic, but withdrawal can be trained. Every time you don't fight for attention, you recover energy for yourself. There's a familiar scene. You're at a family table, the noise rises, conversations overlap, and you're left on the margins. Before, that hurt. Today, it can be a signal, not of exclusion, but of freedom. Not every silence is rejection. Sometimes it's space, and space, when used well, strengthens you. The phrase that stays with me here is simple and doesn't try to close anything. I don't need to be seen to exist. When you let go of that competition, a deeper question opens up. If you're no longer fighting for family attention, where will you invest your connection, your time, your words? Because belonging doesn't disappear, it gets redefined. And that brings us to the next point. 8. Choosing relationships by affinity, not by blood. There's an idea that's hard to let go of because it comes wrapped in guilt. That family is the only legitimate place to belong. Many of us were taught that everything outside of it is secondary, temporary, less valuable. And when you grow older and that core no longer holds you the way it once did, the emptiness feels doubled. You don't just lose presence, you also lose permission to look for it elsewhere. It took me years to give myself that permission. Thinking it through slowly, I understood that blood explains origin, but it doesn't guarantee affinity. There are people you share history with, but not language. Values that no longer align. Rhythms that don't speak to each other. Forcing belonging where there's no resonance is a slow form of erosion. Why keep insisting on bonds where you have to translate yourself all the time? I remember a late friendship, born almost by accident. There was no shared past, no obligation, no expectations, just sober conversations, comfortable silences, mutual respect. No one asked me to be different. No one expected anything beyond honest presence. That's when I understood something no one had ever told me. In old age, affinity matters more than history. This isn't an invitation to break with your family or replace it. It's an internal reordering. Stop demanding from one relationship what it can't give, and open space for others that can sustain you. Epictetus spoke about choosing carefully who you give your time and your words to. I translate it this way: not everyone deserves access to your inner world, even if they share your last name. The tool here is concrete. Notice who you can be yourself with without explaining. Whose silence doesn't feel awkward with. Who you don't need to compete with or defend yourself around. It might be a neighbor, someone from your area, a small group with shared interests, or even just one person. Don't look for quantity, look for sober quality. One real bond is worth more than 10 empty commitments. There's a scene that repeats often. Older people waiting for calls that never come, while ignoring real and possible connections around them. The world didn't end because family pulled back, but it does shrink if you decide not to step out and meet others as who you are today, not who you used to be. The phrase that stays with me here is clear and doesn't try to close anything. Belonging is also a choice. When you start choosing relationships by affinity, something settles into place, and from that new order, a final question appears, perhaps the deepest one. What do you do with everything you've lived when you're no longer seeking approval, attention, or permission? What do you do with that distance? Because there, if you don't distract yourself, a legacy begins to take shape. 9. Transforming exclusion into legacy. Exclusion hurts more when it arrives late in life, because you didn't expect it there. You thought that after giving so much, after being so present, that place was secure. And when it's lost, there's no immediate anger. There's a kind of quiet emptiness, a question that isn't said out loud. And now what do I do with everything I am if I no longer have anyone to offer it to? For a while, I lived that distance as an injustice. I didn't complain, but I carried it inside. Until I understood something that changed my perspective. Exclusion isn't just a closing. It can also be a liberation. When you no longer have an audience, when you no longer have to please, convince, or sustain other people's expectations, you're left facing what's essential, and that's where a different task appears, quieter and deeper. Thinking about it calmly, I realize that every life, even the most discreet one, leaves a trace. Not always in the form of recognition. Sometimes it leaves form. Example, coherence, order. A legacy isn't what people thank you for while you're alive, but what remains when you're no longer explaining yourself. Seneca said we live as if we were eternal, but act as if nothing mattered. In old age, that contradiction becomes visible. Picture a simple scene. You're alone at home, going through old papers, photos, notebooks. No one rushes you, no one gives opinions. That moment, which many people avoid, is an opportunity. There you can put your story in order. Understand which mistakes you wouldn't repeat, which values you did uphold, what you learned late, but you did learn. Family exclusion gives you something you didn't have before, perspective without interference. The tool here is deep, but concrete. Start writing to create order, not to be read right away. Write down thoughts, decisions, principles that support you today, not as a legal will, but as a human testimony. Even if no one ever reads it, the act of writing brings order to your life and restores meaning. A legacy begins by giving coherence to yourself. There's a necessary warning. If you turn exclusion into resentment, your legacy will be bitter, even if you never say it out loud. But if you turn it into clarity, your very way of living becomes teaching. Without speeches, without reproaches. Those who look will learn, and those who don't were never part of that destination. The phrase that stays with me here doesn't end the path, but it guides it. Not everyone is meant to applaud your life, but they may be touched by its example. And with this, nothing really ends. It gets ordered, because now it's time to gather what you've walked through, look at it head-on, and decide how to keep living these years with conscious dignity. That's what we're going to close now. We've walked a long path, and if you've made it this far, it hasn't been out of casual curiosity. We talked about separating dignity from approval, withdrawing energy from exhausted roles, inhabiting solitude without fear, ordering values without asking for permission, setting sober boundaries, building self-sufficiency, letting go of the competition for attention, choosing bonds by affinity, and finally, transforming exclusion into legacy. Not as isolated ideas, but as a single inner movement, reclaiming sovereignty at a stage of life where many assume it's already lost. If I had to leave you with one reflection, it would be this. Old age doesn't take away your value, it takes away distractions, and that, painful as it may be, is a rare opportunity. When you no longer need to please, when you're not begging for a place, when you don't explain every decision, you begin to live from a firmer center. Not to isolate yourself, but to be at peace with yourself. And from there, any bond that remains will be more real. My name is Gabriel, and this is the Stoic Garden. This channel exists to accompany you in the second half of life, helping you live with dignity, clarity, and independence, using Stoicism not as theory, but as a daily method. If this video helped you put something in order inside, I invite you to subscribe, to share it with someone who needs it, and to leave a comment with the phrase, "I am Stoic," along with the country you're listening from. I read every comment, and it matters to me to know from which part of the world this community of people who refuse to surrender to dependence or noise is growing. Next, 2 videos will appear that may interest you. Choose one, and let's keep walking together. Here we don't promise easy comfort, we promise sober strength. See you.